Hi, this is David Rice. I have a Substack called Hit Christian. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, and Missouri Liberty Radio. I'm there on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons through Owensville. I am here today with Shondi Dobbins,
Yep.
and she and I are going to be discussing a church that she was a former member of, called C. It's now called C3, but at one time
It was Christian Community Church
Christian Community Church
until 2019.
2019, and then it got shortened to just C3. That very nice millennial thing to do.
Yes.
Countryside Christian Church. So let's talk about the history of it when it was just Countryside Christian Church. What was that like?
Well, with my husband and I, we'd been with him joining the military in 2007. So we had gone there a few times off and on. We'd checked out different churches. It wasn't anything spectacular. It was just it felt normal. I'm Pentecostal, so it was kind of down key for me, low key. I decided that we would try a different church.
There were non-denominational.
Yes.
Okay.
They claim to be non-denominational. And there were a group of pastors at that time. And I'd have to look up the name because it's spelled the way it's spelled. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but they've disappeared. They're no longer in the area at all.
Okay.
So the lead pastor that's there now, somewhere in between, has become, from playing guitar, being a discipleship pastor, to full lead pastor. His wife was the singer on the stage with him. His oldest son is the guitar player with him. He plays guitar, sings, and his oldest daughter does her singing as well. And they finally found someone. I don't know if he's related, but there's maybe 3 people on stage that are not his family.
Okay, so the new lead pastor and his wife, their names are Nick Terry and Barb Terry.
Yes.
Okay.
Are the pastor and his wife.
So when they came to the church as lead pastors, the co-pastors, they changed the name from Countryside Christian Church to
C3. Yes. And what I was told was that Barb said she did it so that she was wanting to reach out to the college age. She was more interested in bringing young people in, and she thought that the C3 would be her way of doing that.
Maryville has Northwestern University here, so you have a college. And so you can kind of see the reasoning sometimes behind trying to reach out to a younger generation.
Right.
But you also have you have a wide variety of people here.
Right.
So it's not just one group of people.
Right.
So they changed the name. And what other changes did you start to see as they came on board?
So for having health issues, I didn't go for quite some time. When we did come back from the military in 2013, it was just me and my 3 kids. My husband was still stationed in North Carolina.
Okay.
We started going to different churches. My youngest son happened to like C3. Again, they had a different set of people. I believe at that time it was Danny Atkins, and he had a twin brother. They were on the stage and doing their singing stuff, and Nick was the pastor. Nothing unimpressive, nothing extreme impressive. It was normal. It was just normal. So we continued to go there for a while, but we lived still 30 minutes out of town. So when my kids started college, when they finally got out of school, they moved here, and my daughter met a boy from school, and he was raised, he's a Christian, so he got her going back to church. They decided to go to C3 because it was the last church that we had been going to.
Okay.
At that point, Nick was the lead pastor. Didn't think much of it. Okay, he was the song service. He was set down his guitar. He was the pastor. He was the closeout singing pastor. Like, There was no
He had
one.
just sort of moved into the position. Do you know what his background is theologically? Did he go to seminary? Did he?
He went to Ozark Christian, and I looked it up. Let me double check. Um,
So down
he did go to something in Springfield, but
some,
it's Ozark
something in
Christian
Springfield,
Seminary.
Ozark Christian Seminary in Springfield. So there, that may have been part of the James River campus, possibly something I can look into and
Right.
try getting the details on. So he has some background, and
He didn't finish, is what Barb told me.
didn't finish. So, which I can't blame him because I didn't finish my seminary degree.
Right. I'm on board with that.
I had to finish something else. And so he is lead pastor. He's teaching. I saw that he has a podcast and he does all these things. In his theology and when his preaching, did you notice anything that was concerning? Did you notice anything in the way he presented to the church that created acts of service that were concerning to you?
Yeah. So when we started in October, I was pretty quiet. That was when I first started going. My daughter and her boyfriend had been going there for a little bit. My first encounter, I told my husband right off the bat I had a bad feeling about the pastor's wife, and I just wasn't, something was not settling. So I let it go because I was like, I don't have a reason to be judgmental. Why would I feel like that? She's not done anything. So from October through November, we started doing just the regular stuff. They would have after church meals once a month.
Okay.
So we went to it, and then they had a prayer. One Sunday night would be a prayer to get together to pray over the people on the prayer list. Again, normal, expected that.
Yeah.
So I went because my biggest thing was I've got 2 boys in college now that the only thing they're learning is how to hate themselves because they're white males.
Yeah.
And that all they're learning is to drink.
Yeah. That's college is not helpful right now.
And they avoided it the whole first part of the year, and then it's almost like they were completely forced into being nothing but that. So I asked for prayers, and since he plays the guitar, I specifically was like, I would really like for my son to have, someone to pray for him, to where his mind goes, instead of to this cloudy place after being a Marine, coming out of the Marines with this PTSD stuff. I wanted that. I don't want him being depressed and listening to Zach Bryan, and that's the only thing he plays on the guitar.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I would really like it if he would learn, even if you were to write down the chords, for him to learn a Christian song so he can play something that would bring him out of depression.
Sure.
The pastor laughed and scoffed at me. Like, what's wrong with Zach Bryan? He goes, I happen to love Zach Bryan. And I just kind of was like, it hit me as this is not a normal pastor's response. There was no, I'll pray for you, or no, nothing. And it was almost like shaming me for even thinking there's a problem because he's drinking.
Yeah.
Yet again, I was like, what's wrong with drinking and singing Zach Bryan? Well, nothing. I listen to secular music occasionally too.
Yeah.
But from there, we went, that was around November. So then December came around and we did caroling with them, which is when I started meeting other people in the church. And they were normal people, seemed like it. And so I got invited to more stuff. And then people I had met were talking to me and introducing me and trying to tell me things. And when I turned around, there was a couple that were inviting my daughter and her boyfriend to their Connect group at their home.
So the Connect group sounds like a Bible study.
Right, which is
And
what you would expect.
and you would always want more Bible study in a church, and that sounds like something I would want everybody to attend.
Yeah, that was my thought.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, you got it's Wednesday night, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Because first off, I knew my daughter wouldn't go unless I did, but I wasn't invited. Basically, the woman looked at me like this snarky face, like, oh, sure, okay. And in fact, they continued to talk to my kids. And then afterwards, it was the man that was with her that was like, oh, yeah, we'd like to get together in the middle of the week so that we, can help each other since, it's hard in the middle of the week, and so that we can come together with Christians knowing that we're not all perfect.
Yeah.
Making it very I was like, okay, we're all sinners.
And we all need support.
Right. That's a normal thing. But not the woman. The woman didn't talk to me. The man did. And I was like, okay. They both had different last names. And I was like, that's fine too, because it is what it is. Do I believe what I believe for my personal self? But I can't make someone else. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
So I was like, okay, cool. And I was like, oh, bring food. It's always food. They have to share a meal once a week. It's almost like a side law.
Yeah.
It had been in every sermon. Everything was about sharing a meal once a week. You have to share a meal.
With this Connect group.
Or with the church, because they did have their church meal once a month. Mm-hmm. And then didn't even know it was a regular group. They acted like they were just now starting it. Like, we're just going to start it.
Okay.
So we go, and the man that lives there.
But not her husband.
They're not married.
Okay.
They had a bunch of kids there. Tons of teenagers, because they have probably 5 kids apiece. I mean, they have quite a few kids themselves. I assumed that they were their kids, but they don't have their kids all the time.
Okay.
And we had all this food, and Andy is his name.
Andy's the name of
is the guy that lives there, and he's like they seem important in the church. They made sure it was like basically like they were more leaders than you normally know. That the leaders aren't the pastors. Usually it's someone else.
So like elders or deacons in the church, they have that kind of position, some kind of position of leadership.
That normal churches do, but they have no type of organization that I've actually understood.
So there's no hierarchy, there's no title for them, but they definitely have an unsaid leadership role.
Yes, and those are the things that when you look at my screenshots and the messages, and the pastor's wife actually told me she couldn't talk to me until she cleared it with Erin, who is the woman that invited us to that Connect group. So
the woman who was talking to your daughter and her boyfriend, but not wanting to speak with you.
Right. So we go, and they concentrated mostly on Andrew, and Andrew and Jaden didn't go because he's into he was a basketball coach and that type of stuff. So they didn't go to the first one. Mm-hmm. So she very fakely tried to make like she was friends with me. And I don't know, I have an intuition, but I also am aware that you can only fake so much. And when somebody is just like, has this weird face and it's very so fake smile, like every politician you've met.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like asking me questions, where I'm from. And then Nick, the pastor, gets there and Barb gets there, and they start to discuss the community that they had been preaching about was Acts, because having community get together and everybody put their stuff all together in one location, mm-hmm. and nobody owned anything. And then Aaron kept saying, well, you can go to your own house.
So they were speaking this very, so lack of ownership, mm-hmm. lack of property, mm-hmm. lack of, what else does that entail?
No vehicle. No, you don't own anything, but everybody gets to own. No one owns anything, but everybody gets to use everybody's stuff. So it's more like
very, very communal.
Mhm.
The 1970s saw a lot of these communes.
communes.
So when you kind of have this very open property situation with the commune, you
Who's
start
in
to
charge?
wonder who's in charge, but you also start to wonder, well, how does this affect relationships?
Exactly. And that's where I started getting very strangely about how they were very jokingly with each other in their comments because they added me to a group me and
Uh,
they would use words for food and it would go from chicken breasts to turkey to chicken boobs or weird things like that. And I'm like, man, this just gets weirder and weirder. These aren't things I would talk to with my pastor,
uh,
let alone just even a group of women or people I just met. It just was something weird.
so when they were using words that would say, "Hey, let's bring some turkey breasts for," which I don't know why would anyone say turkey breasts, but or chicken breasts, but they would say chicken boobs.
Yeah.
What else? Do they use any other terms that would be inappropriate?
There is, but I'd have to actually, since they kicked me out of the group me.
Yeah.
I had luckily screenshotted a bunch of that past conversation. So I'd have to actually, and that's what I had on that's loaded. You'll have to, when you look at it, you'll be able to read. And they were joking in between themselves. So they're private jokes, but you can tell that it's getting to the point. Oh, one comment she made was pool party suits optional.
Okay, so bathing suits are optional at their pool party.
Basically, yeah.
But this is a pastor's wife speaking about going nude at a.
Oh, this was the Aaron.
This is Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the house.
Okay, at her house. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, but suggesting this in a private group chat with the pastor and his wife
Mm-hmm.
and with you.
Yes, and several other people that were, that frankly, it seemed like there were other people involved, but very few actually showed up. Only a specific same amount.
Okay, so we have some raunchier type text.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the first meeting you have with them.
Right. And they gave it, and they get to talking to my husband, and he's drinking.
Mm-hmm.
He's drinking his beer can and stuff, and we got to talking about the fact it came up that he had a heart attack and God saved him, or something happened with his heart. So it brought up the issue with my heart because I had told them I can't promise that I'm not going to have an episode and be able to be here. So if that happens, if we commit to having food, we'll drop the food off and I just won't go. I just won't be able to come, but we're going to keep our commitment.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, that's no big deal. And that was when Erin got into talking about how she's been seeing a doctor recently because she can't eat anything, that everything bothers her. Not like just lactose intolerant or not like certain things you have to cut out. She had to cut out everything and she could only eat like parsnips or something strange, something off the wall.
Sure.
And occasionally some fruit. So she could cut up fruit, which none of it made sense, but she didn't eat anything that anyone else brought. But she made food for us to eat.
So lots of food
Lots of food from different people that you have no idea who've never met. And then knowing I was on medication, they still offered me moonshine that one of his customers had made
out of his personal still.
Yeah. And even if he'd gone to the store, it wasn't even that. He literally said it was made by one of his customers, gave to him. So you have no backing, and you've got this stuff. Well, he started giving it to my husband, and I was like, oh, that's really good. Have some more.
Yeah.
And I tasted it, but alcohol doesn't have an effect on me, and neither does drugs the way that people would hope.
Yeah.
So they couldn't figure that out. Right away, it was like I was a mystery, and they were going to crack what was going on with me.
So they were trying to get you more drunk?
Yeah, they were trying to figure out why they couldn't. They used certain words that I've noticed throughout going through this whole thing, and I started putting things together. Certain key things would stick out to me, but God wasn't explaining why he's making this observant yet.
Sure.
So when they said something about joining everything together, it's a community, we live as a community and we take care of each other, almost like, okay, so we're doomsday preppers now. And I just made the I was just kind of like, no, because I am. I mean, I had, when I have the vision, I'm like,
yeah,
I'm going to make it prepare because we're going to have a blackout, this kind of stuff. And I'm like on board with them. I'm like, yeah, we'd love to have a community. And I said, well, did you ask the Mormons how that worked out for them?
Yeah.
And they all turned around and looked at me. And the pastor was standing across the counter from me. And he just like looked at me and this glare on his face. And then he smirked and he laughed like he was like, oh, let's make this a joke. And he goes, yeah, some people just don't know when to shut up.
Yeah. I looked at his Facebook account and I noticed that when he does post pictures of himself, most of his pictures are staring into the camera, trying to mean mug the camera as much as possible, which is an odd behavior for a pastor.
Yeah.
It is strange.
Had you gotten into any of his podcasts yet?
I've listened to one so far, and he's struggling with his wife.
Yes.
There's a lot of struggle with his wife.
That comes up here in a few minutes.
Yeah. And so he's trying, you can tell that he doesn't quite know how to trouble.
Yeah.
And so there is a little bit of that because he seems almost like he knows that she's wrong and her views, but he's afraid to tell her that she's wrong.
Yes, he's definitely. I actually absolutely
that was my impression. And
I feel sorry for him actually.
Yeah. And I'll be clear about that. That was my opinion as I was listening. He seemed like he was afraid to tell her that she was wrong.
Right. So. And that would be where it gets to the more, because these women are very demasculating the men.
Emasculating them.
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry.
Because I'm not a feminist in that perspective. I'm like, if you want to be a fireman, a firewoman, or any kind of that thing, because I've been in EMS and law enforcement, military, I'm for it. But you have to pass the same equivalent test that the man does.
Yeah.
I do not agree with a woman's push-up or women can do less weight on their dragging.
Yeah, if you're an 80-pound woman.
Yeah, if you can't get my husband or my kid out of a burning building, then you need to find something else to do.
Exactly.
You're not qualified.
Yeah.
And that's not to be, I mean, maybe it's bigotry, but
it's not mean. It's if you're an 80-pound man, you wouldn't be qualified either. So
right.
Yeah, it's just size. So
right. Like I mean, they have sizes for the NFL. You have to fit the suit. You're not going to be able to be.
No one's going to ask me to be in the NBA.
Right. Right.
So no one's, and I'm not standing out there complaining about bigotry because I'm not in the NBA. So it is what it is. So.
Right. So as the time goes on, things start happening in some of the services. I start noticing spiritual changes. When I went there, I was like, you know what? They have a lot of talent and on the stage. They're singing really good songs, and I know the songs.
Okay.
And they're talented.
It's effective.
Yes. And I am able to, I've learned from going to Methodist churches and dead churches and having to be stuck at home. I learned to worship regardless.
Yeah.
So when I would worship, even on their shows, you can look, I could show you where I'm at and that they're making fun of, that they're laughing. And when I finally did on the very last time I went, I actually allowed myself to just go in the spirit and ignore them all. And they were all off key. They were all out of whack. It happened to be their very first time that they were going to do the extended worship and prayer service. And I actually wrote a whole thing when they started to bring in doing the prayer thing where she brings you into this controlled voice and wants you to picture your trauma, and she has a paper and wants you to write it into blocks. Well, I was done before she started. You're not just putting on a concert.
Yeah. and I don't know where, since I haven't gone and observed their church, and if once this interview goes out, I will not be allowed to go into the church. So this is one of those things where a lot of churches have gotten to the point where they've become very good at crafting a worship service, very good at crafting songs and getting the emotions lifted up, but they're not very good at crafting the theology. And so they're when I listened to their podcast and they're talking about Paul, he said some things, and I wrote some notes down. They said some things that were very inclusive. They talking about being a woman, and she, especially her, she was talking about how she was so offended by how pastors have used verses in the Bible to put her down, and talking about how when she was a young woman, everybody put her down because she was a woman using verses in the Bible. And she talked about how they have to use things in a cultural context, that the cultural context was more important than what the verse actually said.
Right.
And that was even that the Bible was hard to understand, but the cultural context was always true, always clear to understand.
Right.
And so he's saying things like this. Were they saying things like this from the pulpit too?
Yes. Because if it's on the podcast, it's the follow-up to their sermon. And it does go with exactly like that. What busted me on him was when they put the verse on the screen that I told you about. And I have, I sent you a screenshot of actually the page to her. It'll be in there, on the bulletin. And I wrote on the top, what it said is he's reading from whatever translation, he's reading the verse, and it says, and he says in quotations, somewhere in the scriptures it says, and he continues in this scripture, and I'm like writing on my thing, like, and I'm looking at it, and he's looking at me. And then I was like, okay, I'm sure that was just a tech mess up.
Yeah, because somewhere in the scriptures it says is not a verse.
No. It's not in any verse.
I'm pretty sure if I go to somewhere in the scripture, it says it. I'm not going to find Ezekiel 8:22. I'm just throwing something out there. Or Deuteronomy 6:21. That's not how it works. There's
nowhere in the Bible that says somewhere in scripture it says. It tells you exactly where in scripture it says, if that was going to be the case.
When Jesus is quoting Isaiah, he quotes Isaiah a lot in Matthew. They know exactly where he's quoting, and and there's none of this somewhere in the scripture.
None.
And so Paul, when he's quoting, he's not doing any of these things either. And so we have a failure on his part, because it's very misleading to do that.
It's better.
It does get better, I'm sure. It's an attempt to hide the truth.
Yes, with the truth.
With the truth, yes.
He tells just enough truth to keep even me knowing my Bible enough that it kept me not catching things this whole time. And when it hit me, the Holy Spirit revealed so much all at once that I almost left my husband. I mean, we had a knockdown, drag out fight because I was like begging them, please just go to another church. Don't let us find out any more than what I know. Don't let me have to get there.
Yeah, because when I was listening to this podcast, I was going, oh, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. That is theologically correct. That is an orthodox position. I can back that. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, no.
Right, he did not say that. It. Yes.
So, because there are points where he's saying enough truth that I can fall in line with behind it. And if I don't know what I do know,
that's the problem that I'm having, because if my husband doesn't know, and when I broke it down and explained it to him, he argued with me even then. He goes, I see what you're saying, but I don't see it that way. And I was like, you don't understand. If I die today, will you understand that he's misleading you by telling you just enough truth to send you to hell for eternity?
Yeah, she had on her Facebook, she has a sign where it says, fight like a girl, protest against social injustice. one of her children's holding, and I don't want to talk about her children. If
Yeah.
the What We Believe barely talks about sin and the problems with sin.
They absolutely don't. They absolutely, just like they're the only church that has anything to do with any recovery support systems in this town. No one else does.
Yeah, she has a book that she wrote. It looks refined by the language of the kingdom, foul-mouthed.
Foul-mouthed. Yep.
Yep. So she brags about being foul-mouthed.
I sent you that also in that.
Yeah. So going through her Facebook account, it looks like she had a Facebook post about June 30th, 2018, and I couldn't figure out what was so important about June 30th, 2018. But she says she's inspired by something about what is done cannot be undone, but one can prevent it from happening again. She's talking about Anne Frank. So something happened on June 2018 to June 20th. And I know that the Supreme Court decisions often happen at the end of June, but it wasn't the Dobbs decision because that happened at a later date.
What date?
So there's something
You said that was 2018?
2018.
Okay, so that wouldn't have been
the Dobbs decision.
Okay.
But she also has on my list to read soon, Falling Upward by Richard Rohr,
You found that too.
So Richard Rohr is not a Christian.
Nope.
He is very unorthodox.
Yeah.
She has Mel's My Girl, the Mel Robbins podcast, which is also very unorthodox. So she is promoting the most unorthodox people on her personal website.
And so is he. You'll follow that with Nick too.
She's got another person named Alan Hirsch, who's a person that's a problem. She promoted her daughter doing the 3 Circles Living, which is all about wealth creation for, and not even for Christians, just wealth creation, teaching it to children inside the church.
Yes.
And so there's all kinds of issues within the church itself that doesn't look like Christianity. It looks like social justice and inclusion,
Exactly.
DEI. It looks like she's bringing some of the stuff that she's getting from her school into her church.
She's pushing these things in her school.
I'm sure, yes.
Because she brings that up a lot. Almost everyone in their church is involved with the schools.
So which school is she at?
She actually was working at Jefferson, which is Conception Junction area. That's also where Jeff Farnan was on the school board. He lives in Stewartsville.
So Jeff Farnan
doesn't even live in the same town.
So Jeff Farnan is tightly involved with
her.
With her. So there's this familial, I'll call it familiar because I want to call it something else, connection with Jeff Farnan again.
Yep.
And so we have all these connections and problems with...
And then you've got Nick Terry, who was a nurse, and he's from Joplin area, in fact, which is where you're going to find a lot of connections, and in the Ozark area as well. And then, so Nick Terry, for whatever reason, he left his job in the medical field to work at Walmart. And
I saw that on his profile.
Yeah. But he also did sports writing for our high school kids when my kids were playing sports for the Maryville Forum.
So he's part of the newspaper.
Yep.
We got issues with the Jeff Farnan issue.
Yep.
And so there's just ties and connections, and everybody's
cousin is everybody's
has a web connection.
Yes.
So can we go back to one issue? So you went to Aaron and Andy's home, but then your daughter and boyfriend eventually do go to Aaron and Andy's home. And could we talk about that incident? This Breakfast Club.
The Breakfast Club thing. That's where I'm still investigating on how that works out. Okay,
so we don't quite have all the details on this, so we're still trying to understand what this looks like.
Right, because the Breakfast Club thing actually happened way back. I don't know if they were bringing it up to me. It was just a strange analogy or whatever.
So
my in-laws worked at Kawasaki, and they had a breakfast club they started.
It's a huge plant.
Yep.
Here in Maryville.
Yes. And they're Masons, and they started a swingers club, is what I was told, called the Breakfast Club.
Okay.
And that's when I started hearing these questions about, and they also started a nude colony They were part of one in Topeka that they were paying for. And that was about the time that we left, when we joined the Army to get away from them, because we weren't going to have them around our kids.
Okay, so this is a former problem.
Right. So when we come back and we're in the church and we're thinking, we don't have anything to do with the sexual perversion and that type of stuff, but it instantly seemed to be brought up, like, well, the pastor asked me, well, isn't your family still in Pickering? Aren't you living in Pickering? And I was like, no. And I told them that we don't have anything to do with that family, with those people. And they were like, oh, well, then Andy Adwell was like, that's just judgmental, and that's just being hard. You're just being hateful. You're the one being unforgiving, and that's all on you.
But there's issues, because this isn't just a swingers club. This isn't just a nudist colony.
They had kids involved.
They had children involved. So there are charges of legal charges of child molestation. Is that right?
I turned them in, and I was told by the town, by children department, CDS, Children Department of Services, whatever.
In Kansas.
Yes. And they called and set up an appointment so they could clean up their house, clean up everything, and found nothing wrong, and turned around and said that that's a lifestyle choice, and allowed them to continue to have this sexual running around naked with this minor children.
Okay. So that's just a lifestyle choice, and you were told you had a hardness of heart and a judgmental problem that children were being exposed to.
Right.
To that kind of activity.
Right.
Okay.
And then with my daughter there and Andrew, I don't recall, neither one of them were old enough to drink, but I don't recall them trying to even attempt to in front of me, because they'd known I was kind of very weirded out by it anyway. They were still doing it, but they didn't have enough. They were still feeling me out for that. So when they were there, they just talked. They have their meeting minutes, their bulletins. Their bulletins look like this, and then his preaching sermons are on the back. And as he preaches, they go through all of these things here. And then these are the questions. They even control the questions. He writes the questions for the Bible studies.
I see the we get to that.
The get to, that's in every single sermon.
That is very on topic now for people who are on the left.
Is
or
it?
Progressive. Yeah. That get to is a very left talking point.
They use it almost like what I've noticed is the way that they talk about how they live in rhythms, and that they use specific words like we get to, and the way he pronounces it is almost like you've been hypnotized and he's using a key phrase that will convince you to do something, turn a key.
Okay. All right. So they have a couple of ministries outside of the church that they work with.
Right.
So did you have knowledge on that, or did you want to?
Okay. So yes, they wanted me to work in help with Meals on Wheels is one of the ones they use. They use the senior center that they do volunteer services in, and they do the missions center that they help in. And they also have volunteers from their church that go into the Source in Maryville to do their part.
Okay.
And there's one other. They tried to get involved with the campus Christian house. They have their pastors are the ones that run the ones on campus.
On Northwestern?
Yes.
Okay.
So their thing is all about food. They want to provide the food for everything.
They seem centered on food.
Yes.
I'm not saying that's a bad way to get ministry done, but
it's a weird way. I mean,
but it does seem like
normal, but they push it.
It does seem like that's a strange saying that's what they're. It's an easy way to open a lot of doors, but it's also
they kind of act like it's a controlling factor too, because these addicts these homeless people. Erin calls where I live the hood.
Okay.
She wanted me to have a hood, a barbecue in the park that is on my block, and invite all of the foreign people from the school, all the people in the apartment complexes, so that they could have a free cookout in the park in the hood.
Yeah.
And that I would put it on and they would pay for everything.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, well, why don't you just put it on for the church?
Yeah.
Instead of what are you trying?
This kind of goes back to their non-titles or non-roles, but they have all this power in the church, but they want to be as invisible as possible.
Yeah, and to talk about how much money is no object.
Because she also owns a seed company.
Yep, they own several
businesses. All right, so not only do they own several businesses, but so there's lots of ministries that the church are supporting. They're supporting places like the Shiloh Christian Children's Ranch, the Show Me Christian Youth Home, the Christian Campus House at Northwest Missouri State University, the Source Medical Clinic, For God's Children International, which is an overseas mission.
That's the one they're going to. That's the one they've been claiming that they're going to Moldova and Romania on.
Okay. And then, this one is hard to see because I am blind. Under the Sun Ministries. And do you know much about that one?
No.
Okay. So they have these ministries, but there's some questions about them, especially the Source Medical Clinic. So there's things we need to talk about and investigate more.
Mm-hmm. The big thing I really want to point out is that I'm all for missions. I've grown up in the churches knowing it. I just have recognized these things. When I brought up the questions to them, I was attacked viciously. And everything I spoke privately in a conversation ended up on their podcast in keywords. And they did not like my energy. So they sent me to an energy healer who summons demons and familiar spirits and spirit guides, and uses all the Eastern mysticism, all of it, the smudging, the crystals, the rocks.
Very pagan, very new age.
Yep. And she saw me twice. She charged me, of course.
Of course.
And most people say I shouldn't have gone, but I was like, if you're going to be sending me to an energy healer from a church, I want to know that's first off a red flag.
Yeah.
Well, she didn't like she couldn't change my posture, is the word that the church uses, is your posture, and fixing. They couldn't do it, so they refused to see me anymore. And now I am terrorist number one of the whole county.
So you're shunned from the church?
Yeah. I think they'd want me back if they could get me to, but.
Really? Because that would be a victory in their cap?
Yes, and because they're trying to find
ways to say that they won, or
to be able to if I was to go back, then they can say, see, we told you she was making all of this stuff up.
Okay.
Because they've been saying a lot about me to other people that after leaving the church, I suddenly got this huge storm of people wanting to be my friend from that church and ask me where everybody works. So,
stalking you, following you.
The pastor's wife, she wanted to know where my kids worked, what they did, where my husband worked, what he did. Same thing with Erin saying, hey, I saw your kids were on vacation in Florida. They're so cute, calling them lovebirds. The energy healer, she claims that she'd gone to the Bible study with Erin. She actually goes to the other church that we've gone to. She claims that she uses the Holy Spirit with spirit guides and calls our guardian angels and does it through work. Those two don't mix.
No.
And so she literally believes, she doesn't believe, she's telling other people so that you will believe that she's doing this through Christian.
Yeah.
And now they're bringing in this trance-like extra prayer meetings at the beginning of every month.
So it's not really prayer, it's a trance meditation type behavior.
With a slight strumming of the music, and she when he tried to leave the stage, she stopped him.
Buddhist type, New Age.
Yeah. There's been yoga.
So very 70s.
Yes. And told flat out that Jesus died for our sins so we can live the way we want to. So hanging out at the bar is the norm for them. That is the thing. And so I guess the last thing I would tell you is that I never thought I would ever even be sharing it. I was just going to leave the church and go somewhere else. That I just have not been left alone.
Yeah.
I've been forced to come back and say, hey, what happened to people asked me from the board. But when Barb took me, the pastor's wife, when she took me to coffee, it was when she kept not being able to get me to conform to what her posture was. She convinced me that I was having too much trauma and she could teach me, but I would have to relive my trauma. And that
the only reason you do that is because in a cult they want you to relive your trauma so that they can break you down, and once they break you down they can rebuild you into whatever person they want you.
That's right.
It's a technique the cults do to reform you into their person, and then they capture you forever, or hope to anyways.
And that's what these prayer meetings do. Is she folds the paper into 3 and she says, now calm your mind, get comfortable. Now visualize this thing that you think you want God to do for you.
Visualize.
Write it down.
Not pray, not to communicate with God, not have a relationship with God.
Right.
Not read the Bible.
Nope.
No, just visualize.
Right. They've actually made comments, like the pastor commented that he made the comment that David was just a whiner, that he was trying to manipulate God into doing what he wanted when he was singing his laments or whatever he called them.
David, the psalmist.
King David from Psalms.
I can't understand this David, being a whiner.
No.
Sometimes I do. But King David, the psalmist,
Yeah, and he totally discredited Jonah in one of his messages.
Isn't it funny how much wiser he is than all these people that God chose?
So what they told me was that because I know more about the Bible than he does, that I intimidate him. Well, if you're a pastor, that's going to be a thing. That shouldn't intimidate you. If you're going by the Bible, that shouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, if you're coming across people who know more about the Bible than you do, you should want to bring them into your circle, not be intimidated by them.
Right. I mean, there's nothing to be intimidated by if he's reading correctly.
Yeah, if they're good Christians and they know the Bible well, you want them, as God is bringing them into your life for a reason.
Right.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Right. I overlooked the devil horns that she was throwing when she was praising. I was like, it was in the same sermon where it wrote on there somewhere in the scriptures. It says that was it happened in June. So that would have been like January 21st's episode. Was completely deleted. There's no podcast. There's no Facebook page, because that's the one I asked him a question in it. And I asked him, he had no answer for it, but it was deleted like it never happened.
Of course.
So,
well, Shandi, thank you for your time this afternoon. I appreciate it.